So let's just start with a round of introductions. I'm not going to introduce myself again because you'll have all just heard me speak, but let's go around. And for those obviously who are joining for this session, I'll come to you first, Luke.
Hi, Luke Froment, Trailblazer Lead for the Essex and Suffolk DFJ region.
Thanks, Luke. Morgan, go on, let's introduce you. I'm sure people will have seen you, but they may be just joining.
Go on then, 15 months of Trailblazers. If people don't know me by now, then I'll be extremely disappointed. But my name is Morgan Nasser-Finlayson. I am the program manager for the DFJ Trailblazers pilot overall, and I'm also the coach for the Essex and Suffolk area.
Great, thank you, Morgan. And James, who's just joined us. Thanks, James.
Hey guys, I'm James Amphlett. I'm the Chief Digital Officer at the City of Wolverhampton Council.
Excellent. Thank you all for joining. And just move us on to our next slide, and we'll go just a brief overview of what this session will cover, what you'll be not hearing so much from Morgan and I, but from Luke and James, and you can hear from what they've been doing over the past year. So we have a few slides to share. We have a few products that we want to share with you all, but just a brief overview. So we wanted to talk a bit about what the Trailblazer ambitions were around improving data. It was a focus really for all areas of all 5 Trailblazers to some extent. We'll get a bit of an overview of the process in Essex and the collection that they came up with. Some sort of insights from how you support authorities to complete new data returns. I really want us to talk about what Wolverhampton do well and how they sort of demonstrate leadership in this field across their region. And then, of course, the sort of vital next steps, which is actually you've got your data, you've got all of these, new KPIs and new insights. What do you do next? And then finally, thinking about seeing the bigger picture. Again, we're talking about local authority data collections, but local authorities obviously aren't the only stakeholder in the system. So how we join that data collection up with other partners. So really what we're trying to show you in this session is the sort of end-to-end journey from the beginning when you're sort of scoping your KPIs and your data collections all the way through to the end where you've got a nice dashboard, hopefully, and what do you do next with that? If we could just move on. And I think Morgan and Luke are going to chat about this.
Great, thanks, Yannick. So as mentioned, this is a part of the sort of early phase of the end-to-end data journey. So Luke, can you talk us through the start of the journey for the Essex, Suffolk, Southend and Thurrock area and what was already being collected across the region?
So we had the initial kind of baseline analysis as part of the Trailblazer project that identified several key challenges that we wanted to try and get a grip of. One was having a more consistent regional data set, leading to more consistent data collection and to use that to support consistency of tracking of the practice across the region. We wanted more consistent data collection process, and we wanted to be able to enable the collection and analysis of live data so that we could understand issues of challenge and of delay as they arise and over a period of time. So we wanted to be able to kind of better articulate the progress that we were making locally, as well as the opportunities for de-escalation of those drivers of delay. We felt that with stronger live data management, we would be able to have a better understanding of the workflow of cases going into public law proceedings. We looked to the 4 LAs to standardise the data that they were collecting and to build up the existing methods that they were using to track practice in both pre-proceedings and public law. We wanted to capture the PLO data and terminology more consistently across the region, including the definitions of the data points that we were collecting. We wanted to understand the areas of delay and the areas of pressure across the system in terms of workload. And we wanted to be able to be really clear about those areas by backing them up with a clear data set that could be shared with leaders across the system so that there's a consistent understanding at that level. And we wanted to work with the court service to incorporate that work into the multi-agency forum, the public law subgroup of the LFJ and the LFJB itself, and to be able to report consistently on that data set, again, to understand the progress, understanding points of challenge as they develop, and also to integrate a regional kind of audit activity and learning cycle within that forum. When we first looked at PLO tracking across the 4 local authorities in our region, we found 81 points of data that were being tracked across 4 different LAs. And of that 81 points of data, 7 of those data points were being tracked consistently by all 4 LAs with comparable definitions in relation to that data, which was surprising. But all of those local authorities were kind of coming at the same issue, but from very different angles, different understandings, different definitions, and for different reasons in some cases. So we had some local authorities that had very automated tracking process where they were able to draw data down from the recording systems that professionals were using on a daily basis. We had some local authorities that were tracking very comprehensively in terms of practice, but very labour-intensive manual processes that support that data tracking. We had some local authorities that were much more in the early phases of developing their tracking systems. So again, one of the things we wanted to do is look at the definitions around those data points as well. So one of the conversations that we had early on in the project was, well, when does a PLO plan start? And some local authorities felt that the start date of a PLO plan is the date you make a decision to go into PLO as a local authority. Other local authorities felt that the start date was the initial meeting you have with a parent, where you have an informed conversation with a parent about PLO and what that means. So we wanted to sort of come out with some consistency in terms of those definitions as well. The data set that we ended up with, we were informed by the work in Warrington around data, and also in liaison with the Central London Trailblazer project around data that they had been collecting. We pulled together a kind of ideal data set, but then we had an exercise where we liaised with the practice and the data teams across 4 local authorities in our area to understand what of those ideal data set they could report on now, and what they were working towards reporting on in the future. And we also made the distinction around whether they were able to report automatically or whether there were manual elements to that process, to give us an idea about if we were going to go back to these local authorities on a regular basis and ask that data to be provided, what were the implications for those local authorities in terms of resources and time and things like that. So what we've got on the screen here is a data tool or a mapping tool really, that we identified, where the first couple of columns are the data points that we ideally wanted to be reporting on. And then you can see across the top there, for each local authority, there's a color-coded column to set out what data can we report now in the current situation, and what will we be able to report on in the near future and as the work progresses through the project. The color codes are green for data that can be reported automatically. The amber means yes, we can report on that data, but actually that's a manual process and that might be quite time consuming. And the reds are data that we just can't report on.
Great. So once that mapping exercise was done, what did we decide were the priority areas? What is it that you wanted to be able to show as a region? If we jump onto the next slide.
Yeah, there were 5 general areas that we focused on. We wanted to look at demand and care demand. So we were thinking about numbers of children subject to PLO, numbers of children subject to public law proceedings. We wanted to get a sense of outcomes from PLO in terms of how many of the cases that went into PLO stepped down and how many were escalated, to get a sense of how successful that work was. We wanted to understand the different LA profiles and look for indications where there were good practice that can be shared with other stakeholders across the system. Second area we were looking at was around duration and outcomes of public law and pre-proceedings. So where can we see indications of good practice, and do good outcomes correlate with duration in pre-proceedings? So one of the interesting things that we found when we started to look at this for one of our local authorities were where the duration of their PLO plans seemed to be on the longer side compared to other parts in the region. But when we broke that down, what we began to see was that cases that had gone into PLO and then escalated into court tended to happen much more quickly. And cases that spent longer in PLO seemed to have a much higher chance of being de-escalated from that PLO work rather than escalated. So that was quite interesting to see, and kind of raises questions about, well, you know, we talk about delay, but actually, do we need to think about what's meaningful delay and what's unhelpful delay? Because if families spend an additional number of weeks in PLO but end up not having to go to court in the first place, and children stay at home with their families and have successful outcomes, actually that's time better spent, certainly for the child and the family, but also for professionals working around those PLO cases and in public law as well. So again, I go back to some of the things I was talking about this morning, which is it's not necessarily about the numbers, but it's about understanding the story behind those numbers as well, and doing that analysis. We were looking at also care proceedings, so numbers of cases issued, numbers of sibling groups issued in proceedings, and particularly because in our region we've got 4 local authorities, 2 are small unitary authorities, and there are 2 county-wide authorities. Particularly the numbers of sibling groups and the size of sibling groups can have quite an impact in terms of the numbers that are going into proceedings. So not only thinking about children going into proceedings, but families going into proceedings as well. One of the areas that we felt was important to focus on was characteristics of children in terms of age, ethnicity, gender, and those variables. There's relatively recently been a briefing paper from the Nuffield Family Justice Observatory, which is looking at ethnicity of children in care and supervision proceedings in England. Really key reading, and what that highlights is that depending on children's ethnicity can have a real impact on their experience of being in public law and outcomes in public law. So one of the things that all of our local authority leads felt was important is that we use this data to try to be really self-aware about those issues and understand the cases that we're working with in PLO and in proceedings, and where they kind of sit in terms of those particular groups of children. Another aspect in terms of characteristics was around age. So understanding the age that children are when we initiate public law proceedings, and then the age of children when we resolve public law proceedings. So one of the things that we saw in our last data collection is out of 4 local authorities, 3 of our local authorities had a kind of spike in terms of initiating proceedings for children under a certain age group. What was really interesting is that the 3 local authorities had a spike in a different age range. So we could see that one local authority was particularly issuing in that quarter on children who were 12 years and older, another local authority on smaller children, and then there was a group in the middle. So that obviously raises questions about what does the practice look like in those local authorities? Are there things that could be adopted by those local authorities who seem to be issuing on those age groups in terms of the preventative side of the work? What I would say is that we're still quite early on in terms of this whole process, and the kind of range of data in terms of data over time is still quite limited. So we are cautious about when we're seeing those kind of characteristics in the data we're finding at the moment. We're kind of mindful of what that might look like this time next year and then the following year, because that's much more helpful in terms of identifying those patterns. We're also interested in outcomes and themes, so the effect of PLO. Yes, whether cases are escalated or de-escalated, but also the effect of PLO in terms of duration of public law proceedings. So one of the things that we've seen most recently is that cases who have been for a period of PLO and then go into public proceedings, the public law proceedings tend to be between 2 and 3 months shorter on average than cases that haven't been in PLO. So again, it's interesting to think about why that is, and that's also quite a positive indication of the impact of PLO kind of front loading that work and reducing some of that delay once we get into proceedings, which is good to see.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. And very quickly, before we sort of start to move into the next phase of the data journey, if we just jump onto the next slide, we wanted to give you a very quick snapshot of part of what that data collection template actually looks like, intended to be really simple, very intuitive, user-friendly, but as this is the kind of starting point for trying to track what a region is doing across multiple local authorities, this was really one of the starting points for what the blank template could look like to make it easy for multiple local authorities with different collection practices to feed into. We're now going to bring down the slides and get into a bit more of a conversation between the four of us. So we'll just quickly bring those down, and I'm handing it back over to Yannick.
Yeah, that your final point there about supporting local authorities to complete the template is exactly what I wanted to ask you about, James, really. Is obviously you're working across 6 local authorities. You work at Wolverhampton, but you're sort of supporting on this regional collection, and you've got 6 local authorities with kind of different capabilities and different maturities in terms of their sort of their data maturity. So I just, from the sort of Trailblazer perspective, sort of, and I guess you've been doing the data collection across the region before Trailblazer too, but what kind of challenges can this bring? And how do you then support local authorities to make sure, because you want everyone to be able to respond to your data collection, otherwise you've got incomplete data.
Yeah, so I think, as you said, there's lots of challenges around that. So there's that's generally kind of linked to the capacity or the resource of the different data teams, and I suppose the priority of that work within their individual children's social care areas. So I think, as Luke's just tried to or has just explained, it's about keeping it really, really simple, about that kind of constant engagement around the kind of capabilities and the definitions of the KPIs to ensure that we can kind of support each other. The other part that we've started to work on across the West Midlands is we've got a understanding of the fact that a lot of the time the court data doesn't always sit within the social care systems. It's being kept in spreadsheets, it's being kept in forms, sometimes even more manual processes than that. So we've got a piece of work around looking at what should be a court process, and how can we use our kind of combined ability as 6 local authorities to put pressure on the system providers like OLM, Mosaic, Liquid Logic to generate a form within the system that helps us to capture that work. So that work started in Wolverhampton, and then the learnings from that will be kind of carried over to all the local authorities, because as what Luke's demonstrated in the local authority that he serves, we are submitting calculated data at this moment in time, but what we want to get to is to be able to submit automated child level data that is not identifiable, but enables us to dig deeper into the kind of reasons for the DLAs based around the factors of the families involved.
Yeah, I think lots of people will recognize what you're saying around kind of like system, systems being able to capture all of the things and having lots of different data across lots of different spreadsheets. That's certainly probably very common. It certainly was in my experience. But I wanted to ask you a little bit more about specifically the capabilities that you have within Wolverhampton, because when we started the Trailblazer project, I can remember we were both in Walsall Town Hall just over a year ago, and we were talking about one of the things that the area identified was wanting an improved regional data collection, and it was always quite obvious that Wolverhampton was sort of seen by others in the room as like the go-to people to kind of support with that particular work stream of the Trailblazer. So I wondered if you could just tell us a little bit about what your team and what your service does really well in Wolverhampton, and what kind of made you guys like the natural leader for that kind of work. So a bit about your capabilities within your team and your approach to data analysis.
Yeah, I'm quite lucky in Wolverhampton in the fact that we've got a really strong leadership team that really believes in data-driven decision making and the power of us making evidence-based decisions. So the way that we're set up in Wolverhampton is that all of our data is automated from systems. So we have a centralized data team. So it's the service I ran before, the one that I do now, would have everything from children's social care to bin collections to our HR data all in one place, which enables us to automate all of that data. So all of our data refreshes automatically on a day-to-day basis, and is then fed into Power BI. And we have two parts of the team. We have a technical team that is looking at automation, automation of data processes. So actually that there's no manual post within the council that can be automated that we're not quite trying to resolve. And dashboarding, predictive analytics, so we're predicting things before they happen. And then the other part of the team in Wolverhampton are basically storytellers. So they work in the centralized service, but have a foot within the business, and their role is to kind of support the SLTs of different parts of the business to understand the data and to ensure that when we are considering their data, it's at the forefront of all the decisions that we make. The other part that we have in Wolverhampton is an ethos around the fact that whether you're an apprentice, a cleaner, or the chief executive, that you've got a dashboard that helps you to prioritize your work, to be able to again make those data-driven decisions. So it's really important that kind of we can automate that work. We've done a lot of, so the setup of our team is unusual for lots of local authorities. They might have a children's social care team, a HR team. They might have a centralised performance team, but the reporting sits in IT. In Wolverhampton, it's all in one place. Yeah, kind of we've worked very closely with Microsoft. We're kind of one of their delivery partners for AI. And we've established ourselves as at the kind of forefront of trying to do things in a more automated way. That essentially we're a support service. We're supporting people to use data to make better decisions, and we recognise that the forefront of that is people. And actually, can we make things as easy as possible for people to be able to perform better? So I have this kind of bold kind of statement that I say when I go around to different services, which is, if you engage with the dashboards, your performance will get better. It's guaranteed. And there's a real kind of evidence base that shows that when we can track the usage of dashboards and individuals' usage of dashboards, they are always the people who are performing the best, because we know that if people want to fundamentally perform well, we've just got to give them a vehicle to understand their performance to push that forward. So we also have a really strong data ethos across our children's social care leadership team. Children's has always been the area that we've kind of led on first. All of our AI projects that we've started are all starting in children's social care here. And in particular in this area, me and Cherry work really closely together to try and ensure that all of the kind of work that we're doing across the core team is relevant and is providing better outcomes to our children and young people who are using the service.
Great, thanks, James. That's really interesting to hear, and I think you're probably right when you say that your setup is probably quite unusual for local authorities, or it might be aspirational for some, or I'm not exactly sure. But I think a couple of the things that you mentioned around kind of automation, because when we talk about data collections, I think sometimes people automatically go to thinking manually and thinking about how we're going to count all of these things up. And also there was a question in the chat, and this only answers some of it, so we will come back to it. But somebody's written in the Q&A, like, when looking at data, it's tricky to sometimes understand the so what bit. And I suppose your the approach of having storytellers that sit within your team kind of help you to deal with that so what bit, to have people not just present, here's your dashboard, go away and look at it, but like to talk you through that dashboard and what that means, I think is really important. Great. So we are going to just move on, and we've talked about dashboards a bit, and hopefully, James, you'll be able to share a sort of dummy data version of the Power BI dashboard that we have got in Wolverhampton, just to kind of illustrate some of the things that you've been talking about. And I will pass on to Morgan for that section, but hopefully you should be able to share that with us, James.
Yeah, do you want me to share my screen now?
Yes, please. Yeah.
Was that my invitation? Okay.
That was your invitation. Yeah, there's
Okay,
nothing
that's
like
fine.
the silence pre trying to share your screen. So yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Can people see my screen now?
Yes.
Okay, so essentially the dashboard that we've created in Wolverhampton for the region to share, people submit data at the moment through a form. The form automatically updates the data that's in here through role-based security, which we hold in Wolverhampton. All local authorities therefore are able to access the data on our services. So it means that the data is shareable, and even when we get to the stage where we're using child level data, which won't be identifiable to the child, but the details of that will be locked down to the relevant people that need to use it. The data that we're showing here, although it obviously says West Midlands and Wolverhampton, when we look at the data, it's all dummy. It's fake. The local authorities are numbered 1 to 6. They have no representation with different areas. Essentially, what we've been able to do is create a dashboard as such, and as you kind of click in, there's obviously options, and I'm sure people have used Power BI before, where you can look at the whole region as a total, but also that people can use this as part of their own performance framework internally. What we've got on the right hand side is something called Smart Narrative. So it's Power BI's kind of AI function. So the narrative that comes here is not generated by an analyst, it's generated by AI. The AI will look at the data and then will bring back the summary of the key findings. Every graph has the ability to be analysed in this way. So basically, as a director, as a manager, as someone who just works in this part of the team, you're not reliant upon your data team to be able to tell you the basics. When Yannick was talking before about storytellers, what storytellers shouldn't be doing, in my opinion, is saying this has gone up by 5%, this has been gone down by 5%, because the AI can do that for us. What the storytellers should be doing is using that data to proactively improve service delivery. What this does is to give you the basics of this, so that you can go into your local authority and very, very clearly, if you're in a worker at LA2 and you wanted to compare the data in LA4 for baseline information at the end of last quarter, the number of children, the data would be here, and we'd refresh the data, the summary here, and what it would then do is automatically update the information on here as AI would identify it. So the data that we've got is care demand data. As we click in here, there's lots more information here to be seen. And then on every page, there's also an outcomes and themes page. So actually the kind of throughput, the how that's being used, and then what's the outcome of that. Again, at the end of each page, we've got the summary findings. And again, if we were to pick, if you wanted the summary findings for a different year, different quarter, if you wanted it for a different LA, all of that information will update, and the AI will automatically analyze the data in the way that you want. The other part about the AI function is that if you want that to be written in a briefing note, if you want it to be written in a certain font, in a certain style, in a certain for a certain audience, we can program the dashboard to be able to deliver that as an outcome. So, for example, when we are looking to produce a briefing note of all performance in one go, we ask the dashboard to do that, and it generates it. So instead of that taking someone potentially a day to be able to work that through, that's a 5-minute, it's a 30-second job to be able to generate it, and all that the person's doing at the other end is then checking and understanding and approving the analysis that's come out. So it takes us through care demand. It takes us through pre-proceedings. Again, if we wanted to look at all of the quarters, we could compare them. If we want individual quarters and individual LAs, it's all accessible and able to use. And then the summary again, as we click through, updates and changes so that people are aware of the executive summary or a more drilled down version. It also works the same as if we click one part of the assessment graph, it'll change that again as we move through. So we've got that. We've got care proceedings. Again, we've got durations, which takes through that, and then, as I said, the outcomes and their themes. The idea of this eventually is, so this gives a concrete plan, so we're all recording we're all reporting on the same things. We're transparent across the region in regards to what we are tracking and recording. We know at the moment not all local authorities, I think as was touched upon before, are sharing all of the information, because there were certain areas that they weren't necessarily recording within their systems. The plan is from the 1st of April that all local authorities will be submitting data on all areas too. And the other part of the plan, which I touched upon before, was making equal the different ways that we record information, so the forms are all the same, we're asking the same questions, that they're in social care systems, which will then give us data and link to other data that we can then use around the backgrounds of the children, the type of parts of the region that they're coming from, the sibling groups, the parents, and things like that. But yeah, so this was demoed, has been demoed a few times. Q3 is the first time that it's been produced. It went to our PLO subgroup yesterday, and yeah, the feedback's been really, really strong. So the other part, I suppose, is because it's automatic and it's automated, then the actual cost going forward of us being able to keep this running, we've been able to reduce the cost by about 80%. And I'll stop sharing.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, James. And I think that really nicely segues into a couple of the questions that have popped up while you were speaking about sort of the role of the storytellers, and also the big question, the so what. And I think if I can preempt a little bit, the big thing that kind of comes out of this is the ability to have the space to think about the why, that often when you're looking at having to track and then also interpret and analyze the data and having to split it across different teams, it's really difficult with busy day jobs to be able to determine, well, why is it that we're seeing this particular pattern happen? There's also a sort of linked question in here that we've seen sort of pop up elsewhere of, the more you automate something, is that going to cause problems, or is that going to, say, threaten the jobs of data analysts? But I think something that's really sort of nice that's been done in Wolverhampton is turning those analysts into storytellers, that you still have to have the human interaction to say why something is happening, and the ability to read and interpret that data in a way that allows different areas of a business, a local authority, to sort of understand why something is happening and why that data is coming out in that way. I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to ask one final question of both of you in here, which I hope is a nice light question to round things off in here. Because obviously we do want to acknowledge that the data that the two of you have shown us in terms of the start of the journey, but then also the end of the journey, is very much comes from a local authority perspective. And we know that there are other multiple very mature data sets that, for example, that come from CAFCASS and come from HMCTS. And there's a real sort of need to triangulate often different data sources. The big question that I'll pose to both of you, and perhaps come to you first, Luke, on this, is how do we make sure that it's not just one person's side of the story? How do we make sure we're getting a system-wide perspective on court delays, and what are the challenges that would need to be overcome to do this?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it goes back to the importance of feeding this information into that multi-agency forum. So, and that's why in our region, we've kind of focused a lot of our work on having the most effectively informed LFJB as possible. So, you we want to be able to feed that data into that forum alongside the stuff we was talking about this morning, the more qualitative information from practitioners on the ground, so that in that forum lines of inquiry can be agreed, audit actions can be agreed and be taken forward in a coordinated way, because they're the actions that will kind of get to the storytelling side of things, get behind those numbers, and help us have much more effective analysis of that so what question. What does that data mean? So bringing data into that forum, brings not only the gaze of the local authorities, but also of CAFCASS, of the court service, of solicitors who represent families, and opens up those practice themes to lots of different perspectives around what it means and so what, and therefore what do we do? So understanding the story behind the numbers and a willingness from stakeholders to put some time and resources into kind of taking that stuff away and doing a bit of analysis and getting behind the numbers, but also to consider the possibility of adapting practice and doing things in a different way as a result of that work is really important, I think. Obviously, there's lots of challenges around that. Just the practicalities, the time and resources we've talked about already today. The ability to kind of do that follow-up and that audit activity and implement a culture that values that continuous cycle of learning approach to this data. Thinking about the data that can't be recorded, in our region, we've been very LA focused in terms of the data offer, but there are questions around, what's the impact of the change of a children's guardian on the length of proceedings, for example, or how does the frequency of visits between a children's guardian and the child affect the length of proceedings? So there are things there that we know might be variables that impact on performance and duration that we're not recording at the moment. But I think it's about kind of starting off in a position where you use what you've got and you're able to, and then thinking about where are the gaps and where can we expand this out to, so that we become more effective over time.
Yeah, thank you, Luke. I'm aware that we've got a few questions that have still not been answered, and I'm really sorry. We do need to kind of draw this session to a close, but we will come back to people who have asked questions. There's a few similar questions, so we will come back to anybody who has asked a question. But I just want to thank Luke and James for joining us. That's been really, really helpful, really useful, really insightful to get your different perspectives. Luke, obviously yours from a more practice perspective, and James from a more technical perspective. It's been really helpful, and certainly from the beginning of the Trailblazers project, access to data has been completely essential in helping us to diagnose delay, helping us to kind of monitor impact of solutions, and that will continue to be important over the next year. And we know that local authorities are in different places with this journey, but it's been really useful to see kind of where you guys were in Essex kind of at the start in terms of scoping out, and then really helpful to see that sort of not quite the end point, because the end point is kind of what you do with it, but to see the kind of final output in your dashboard, James, has been really, really helpful. So ultimately, the more we know about what's going on in our local systems, the better equipped we'll actually be able to be in order to resolve some of those issues. And some of the ethos you were talking about in Wolverhampton, and that idea about, you will always see better performance the more you engage with your dashboard, I think is a really useful point to take away. So thank you both very much for joining, and we will just wrap up the afternoon over the next 15 to 20 minutes. So I will hand back to Morgan in order to do that. Thanks to both of you for joining.